Shortly before our first reading from the book of Genesis, God creates the earth and sea, and it says that he saw that it was good. He creates the plants, the fruit-bearing plants. It says God saw that it was good. The sun and the moon, God saw that it was good. The sea creatures, God saw that it was good. The birds and all the animals, God saw that it was good. The first thing that he looks at and says, and it says that it is not good, was loneliness. It is not good for man to be alone. There's no need for me to rehearse statistics to make it clear that this is a serious problem in the world today. Not just loneliness, but depression and everything that accompanies that. It's certainly, there's also an acute loneliness that comes from the division within our country. On and on and on. We get it. But the question is, what is God's response to the loneliness of humanity? For Adam, it might be a perfect thing. Or it might have been a letdown to some degree. God's response then is God's response now. So just give me a second to just wrestle with this. God saw that it was not good for man to be alone, and so he gave him a suitable partner. A spouse. Eve. Did that fix the loneliness? It did, until sin entered. Does marriage fix our loneliness today? No, it doesn't. Because we live in a post, what's the technical term? The post-lapse, and we were after the fall. Divorce is still a thing, a very common thing, inside and outside the church. There was a good priest friend of mine was asked, celibacy must be really hard. Do you think that priests will be allowed to get married one day? And my friend, a little snarky, turns and says, has marriage made your life easier? Snarky. Marriage is such a blessing. An amazing sacrament, a mission from God, an exceptional vocation. But it's not easy. Especially good marriages. Not easy. But a privilege and a joy, yes. If you want easy, get a pet. It's going to be hard, but as George Eliot said, animals are the best of friends. They ask no questions and pass no criticisms. A suitable partner has opinions. Makes life a little harder. And that is a gift to you and I. That was a gift to Adam. Because left to our own devices, we start to think pretty good of ourselves. And that starts to transform us within. It makes our hearts hard. They become untouchable. Suitable partner, when some translations translate the Hebrew there as God provided Adam a helpmate. And some people think, oh gosh, that's terrible. Or some people think, that's great. It seems to be saying that Adam has superiority. Eve is just his helper, like his housemaid. Well, if we look at the Hebrew, before we start throwing tomatoes at each other, the Hebrew word used is powerful. It has nothing to do with this kind of subordinate, give me a sandwich woman kind of help. The word is Ezer Kenegdo, which is used 21 times in the Old Testament, 19 of which are in reference to God. God is my help. So it's not making Eve less. In fact, it's comparing her to God. A partner, equal dignity. In fact, to reflect God is what we're called to, man and woman. There's a beautiful poem by some guy named Matthew Henry from a long time ago. He says, God did not take Eve from Adam's head to top him, nor did God take Eve from his foot to be trampled on by him. Rather, God took Eve from his side to walk with him, from beneath his arm to be protected by her, close to his heart to be loved by him. Okay, a helpmate, a spouse. What's hard then? What's hard about this blessing of marriage, this blessing of relationship? What's hard is dealing with the failures and flaws. What's hard is dealing with hardness of heart, which we all have. That's why it's a blessing. It's hard to see it. But look at the gospel. Jesus himself points out that Moses provided for divorce in the old law. But he says this was because of the hardness of your hearts that God permitted Moses to allow for men to divorce their wives. However, recognize that back then in the old law, men had superiority over the women. Women were seen as a form of property. The woman was the property of her parents, of her father, until marriage. Then she became the property of her husband. And so under that worldview, that perspective, Moses granted an allowance for the man to dismiss his wife. Something that God permitted because of the hardness of our hearts. But God has an inexhaustible tolerance for our hardness of hearts. After centuries of dealing with us, he still sends Jesus. After centuries of having the graces of Christ, he still does not cease to pour forth his graces in the sacrament of confession, in the Eucharist, through baptism and confirmation. God has this inexhaustible tolerance for our hardness of heart, for our waywardness. And that is a power that we have access to. That's good news. We can all agree that divorce is evil and painful, even in the friendly divorces. Marriage, however, is so good, all the more so. And that's just a sign of what we're all called to, priests included. We're made to partner up and to work for something greater than ourselves. That's godliness. Godliness is to pour yourself out in generosity, even when you don't get anything in return. That's why relationship is beautiful and very hard. We're called to something greater. And God's not going to force you. But that's what you're made for. He's always inviting you, through repentance and contrition, to live a higher life with his grace. There's something of, even in the rite of marriage, that implies that even marriage isn't made just for the spouses to love each other unconditionally. It's made for more. In the final blessing, there's a prayer that says, "May the afflicted and the needy who have known your kindness welcome you one day in the eternal dwelling of God." The afflicted and needy. Marriage is supposed to be a place of refuge for others. It's not just to make you guys happy. It's to be a light to others. We're all made for that generosity. That's godliness. But that's hard for us because we're prone to waywardness. We're prone to hardness of heart. And that's the real source of loneliness, which is why God has blessed us with enemies. God said, You ought to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And as you seek that grace, it's going to change you. So we're coming now to the Lord. Because divorce and division are not going anywhere until we acquire this capacity from the Lord, this power, this quality of life that He alone possesses. This inexhaustible love for the heart of heart. This mercy that is not just a passive pat on the head. A mercy, however, that wants to transform us, that is a power to transform us from within. And will make us godly in His image, which is what we were made for. Let's bring to Him, specifically on this altar, as a sacrifice, everything that keeps us from that godliness, and be open to having your heart softened.